Learning this history helped me think about Grandma's collection in a different way. Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. Bottle number 121 is a 6-ounce flask of McGuinness Creme de Menthe. I've talked about the McGuinness Distilling Company in 2 previous episodes. In bottle 118, Silk Tassel, they were at the forefront of creating the lighter style of Canadian whiskey that would make the whole category popular for decades. I also told some of their company history in bottle 64, Café Noir, one of their coffee liqueurs. When I started my research on this bottle, I wasn't quite sure what I'd find, but one of the very first hits was a Reddit post where someone was looking to date a bottle of McGuinness from the same era as mine. In the comments was this statement: "The fact that it has a price tag means that it is after the LCBO went self-serve." That's right, after they went self-serve, which means there was a time before that when they weren't, and that seemed like a story worthy of a My Tiny Bottles episode. I guess I shouldn't have been that surprised. I grew up in Canada and do have vague memories of visiting the beer store with my dad. Yes, that was its actual name, the beer store. Those stores weren't self-serve at that time. You went to a counter, told them what you wanted, and eventually your case of beer would come rolling out of the back on a conveyor belt. That would have been in the late 70s or early 80s. The entity behind that was Brewers Retail, and it, along with the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, LCBO, was established at the end of Prohibition in Ontario in 1927. We tend to only think about Prohibition as a US thing, but lots of countries had their own versions of it. In Ontario, the temperance forces were still very strong, so the 1927 Liquor Control Act was meant to allow for a controlled reintroduction of legal alcohol to society. The details of the early days of the LCBO are pretty bonkers by our modern standards. From 1927 all the way to 1962, you had to apply for an annual permit to be allowed to buy alcohol. Once you had your permit, you had to carry a permit book. This included your personal information, including marital status and employer, as well as a record of your purchase history. To make a purchase, you would decide what you wanted from a printed list of items in the store, fill out an order slip, and take it to the counter. Your order would be handed to you in a brown paper bag, of course. Your ability to get and keep a permit was governed by the interdiction list, which was maintained by the LCBO. You could be added to it by the courts. If they declared you to be a drunkard, no booze for you. But the LCBO could also add people to the list based on scrutinizing their purchase histories. They even employed their own team of investigators who could visit a person's work or home, even businesses, banks, and churches, in order to determine if someone was over-consuming. At one point, the mere act of receiving social assistance was enough to get you on the interdiction list. Until after World War II, First Nations people were prohibited from buying alcohol and placed on the list. This list was circulated to all the stores as well as to police with the instruction that it was illegal for people on the list to possess or consume alcohol. It took decades, but by the late 1950s, things started to ease up. The permit book was replaced with a permit card, and the stores started to set up small displays for browsing. Shocking, I know. In 1965, they started publishing a catalog of offerings. Finally, in 1969, it was time for a change. The LCBO opened their first self-serve liquor store in Toronto to much anticipation. For the first time, customers could make their own choices or ask for assistance from trained consultants who were customer service-oriented and knowledgeable about the products. Some of those consultants were even women who had never previously been hired for LCBO stores. There was opposition, of course, mostly by religious types. LCBO employees were also opposed, saying it wouldn't be any faster and it would lead to shoplifting, with one telling the Telegram newspaper that it will never work. But most people were thrilled with the change, so the LCBO began rolling out self-serve to stores all over the province. It was a financial hit, too, with sales up 50% at the self-serve stores. Just 4 years later, in 1973, a quarter of stores were self-serve, but it would take 20 years for them all to convert, with the last closing in the late 1990s. For more on this fascinating history, check out 2 great articles I'll link in the episode description. Learning this history helped me think about Grandma's collection in a different way. Family lore is that she started collecting in the early 1970s, which is probably about the time self-serve stores arrived near her home. I can't imagine the old counter service stores had much in the way of mini bottles to choose from. Minis feels like the ultimate impulse purchase, which self-serve stores finally made possible. And what better way to celebrate than to start a collection of them? Although tasting this bottle probably won't be much of a celebration, vintage creme de menthe has a terrible reputation, as Aaron Goldfarb and I talked about in our tasting of bottle 27, Convier Menta. And I'm not convinced it would have been particularly tasty even when it was new. The color of it does not inspire confidence, being a deep green with a hint of blue at the edges that looks a lot like mouthwash. But I'm guessing this bottle comes from the 1970s, so it would make for some very period-appropriate grasshopper cocktails. Do you remember lining up to order at the counter at an LCBO store? Leave a comment below and tell me all about it. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. Or visit mytinybottles.com and leave one there. Or find me on social media at TammyLC on Blue Sky and at MyTinyBottles on Instagram and Facebook. Cheers!